chicken broiler and egg production are the most progressive animal enterprises in the Philippines today. The poultry industry, in fact, began as a backyard enterprise, has shifted to the formation of very large integrated contract farming operations. The growth of poultry industry in the Philippines has been impressive, but its problems include inefficient management and the prevalence of many destructive poultry diseases and parasites cannot be ignored. One of these diseases is avian influenza or bird flu.
Avian influenza is a viral infection of several species of food-producing birds, chickens, turkeys, quails, and guinea fowls, as well as pet birds and wild birds, with some strains resulting in high mortality rates. This virus is caused by avian influenza virus type A, belonging to family Orthomyxoviridae. Avian influenza has also been isolated from mammalian species including humans, rats and mice, weasels and parrots, pigs, cats, tigers, and dogs. Avian influenza viruses are not new. There are many strains of avian influenza viruses and generally can be classified into two categories: low pathogenic causing subclinical infections, respiratory diseases, and drop in egg production, and the highly pathogenic that can cause severe systemic disease with multiple organ failure and high mortality.
Epidemiology and transmission. How is avian influenza transmitted? The immediate source of infection for domestic poultry can seldom be ascertained, but most outbreaks start with direct or indirect contact of domestic poultry with water birds. Many of the strains that circulate in wild birds are either non-pathogenic or mildly pathogenic for poultry. However, a virulent strain may emerge either by genetic mutation or by reassortment of less virulent strains. How is this possible? Here's why. Influenza viruses are constantly changing. They can change in two different ways. One way influenza viruses change is called antigenic drift. These are small changes or mutations in the genes of influenza viruses that can lead to changes in the surface proteins of the virus, HA, which stands for hemagglutinin, and NA for neuraminidase. The HA and NA surface proteins of influenza viruses are antigens, which means they are recognized by the immune system and are capable of triggering an immune response, including production of antibodies that can block infection. The changes associated with antigenic drift happen continually over time as the virus replicates. Antigenic drift is the main reason why people can get the flu more than one time, and it's also a primary reason why the flu vaccine composition must be reviewed and updated each year to keep up with the evolving influenza viruses. The other type of change is called antigenic shift. Antigenic shift is an abrupt, major change in an influenza A virus resulting in new HA and/or new HA and NA proteins in influenza viruses. One way shift can happen is when an influenza virus from an animal population gains the ability to infect humans. Such animal origin viruses can contain an HA or HA and NA combination that is so different from the same subtype in humans that most people do not have immunity to the new virus. While influenza viruses change all the time due to antigenic drift, antigenic shift happens less frequently. Type A viruses undergo both antigenic drift and shift and are the only influenza viruses known to cause pandemics, while influenza B viruses change only by the more gradual process of antigenic drift.
Avian influenza inside the poultry farm. Once avian influenza is established in domestic poultry, it is a highly contagious disease and wild birds are no longer an essential ingredient for spread. Infected birds excrete virus in high concentration in their feces and also in nasal and ocular discharges. Once introduced into a flock, the virus is spread from flock to flock by the usual methods, involving the movement of infected birds, contaminated equipment, egg flats, feed trucks, and service crews, to mention a few. The disease generally spreads rapidly in a flock by direct contact, but on occasions, spread is erratic. Airborne transmission may occur if birds are in close proximity and with appropriate air movement. Birds are readily infected via instillation of virus into the conjunctival sac, nares, or the trachea. The incubation period of avian influenza is 3 to 5 days in general, but may be longer. Maximal incubation period is 21 days. What are the signs that birds are suffering from avian influenza? In the mild form, signs of illness may be expressed only as ruffled feathers, reduced egg production, or mild effects on the respiratory system. In the severe form of the disease, the virus not only affects the respiratory tract, as in the mild form, but also invades the multiple organs and tissues that can result in massive internal hemorrhaging. Some or all of the following clinical signs are evident in birds infected with a highly pathogenic strain of avian influenza, including H5N1 strain. Quietness and extreme depression, sudden drop in production of eggs, many of which are soft-shelled or shell-less. Wattles and combs become swollen and congested. Swelling of the skin under the eyes, coughing, sneezing, and nervous signs. Diarrhea, hemorrhages on the hack. A few deaths may occur over several days, followed by rapid spread and a mortality rate that can then approach 100% within 48 hours.
Diagnosis. How to diagnose avian influenza? Avian influenza or AI may be suspected on the basis of clinical signs and events leading to the disease. Laboratory tests are required to confirm the diagnosis. First, avian influenza virus isolation. Second, detection of AI viral RNA. Third, detection of AI-specific antibodies. Low pathogenicity avian influenza viruses can be readily isolated from oropharyngeal and cloacal swabs, and high pathogenicity avian influenza viruses from many internal organs. Prevention and control measures against avian influenza. Practice of exclusion biosecurity strategies to prevent introduction of AI into poultry is the best preventive measure. Suspected outbreaks should be reported to appropriate regulatory authorities. Antigenically matched and properly administered vaccines can prevent clinical signs and death and greatly reduce virus replication and shedding from the respiratory and GI tracts. Specific protection is achieved through autogenous virus vaccines or from vaccines prepared from AI virus of the same hemagglutinin subtype. Measures that are recommended by the OIE Terrestrial Animal Health Code at the farm level include: keep poultry away from areas frequented by wildfowl. Keep control over access to poultry houses by people and equipment. Do not provide elements on property that may attract wild birds. Maintain sanitation of property, poultry houses, and equipment. Avoid the introduction of birds of unknown disease status into flock. Report illness and death of birds. Appropriate disposal of manure and dead poultry. If the disease is detected, generally, a stamping out or culling policy is used in the efforts to eradicate the disease. Elements included by the OIE Terrestrial Animal Health Code in a response effort include: humane destruction of all infected and exposed animals, appropriate disposal of carcasses and all animal products, surveillance and tracing of potentially infected or exposed poultry, strict quarantine and controls of movement of poultry and any at-risk vehicles, thorough decontamination of infected premises, a period at least 21 days before restocking.